Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today on Central Booking, I'm going between the lines with award-winning author Terrie Farley Moran. Terrie is the most recent collaborator on the Murder, She Wrote books, which follow the continuing adventures of everybody's favorite mystery writer and amateur sleuth, Jessica Fletcher. Her fourth contribution to the series, Death on the Emerald Isle, finds Jessica visiting her beloved Ireland. After filling in for a fellow author at a book festival in Belfast, she continues on to Bushmills to do a favor for a friend. But when she comes across a dead body while bicycling through the countryside, solving a murder takes priority over tea and scones, though there are plenty of those too. Terrie's other Murder, She Wrote books include Killing in a Koi Pond, Debonair in Death, and the Scribe Award-nominated Killer on the Court. She also wrote the three-book Read 'em and Eat series. The first, Well Read Then Dead, won the Agatha Award for Best First Novel. Additionally, Terrie collaborated with Laura Childs on 4 New Orleans scrapbooking mysteries. In addition to being the newest installment in the venerable Murder, She Wrote canon, Death on the Emerald Isle is dedicated to the late Angela Lansbury, who brought Jessica Fletcher to life on the small screen for 12 seasons. Now, Terrie Farley Moran reflects on her life in reading and writing and answers the question on all our minds. Will there be more Murder, She Wrote books, and will she be writing them? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Central Booking. Today, we are going between the lines with award-winning author Terrie Farley Moran, who currently writes the Murder, She Wrote books, the 50 some odd of which came out real recently. We got Death on the Emerald Isle, where Jessica travels to Ireland, and of course, terrible things happen, but in a charmingly cozy way. Welcome back to the show, Terrie. It's so nice to have you here.
Oh, it's so great to be with you again, John. I enjoyed our last conversation so much that I was delighted to be invited back.
I was so happy when you said yes, and I'm thinking you were my milestone 100th guest, and now we're at
Yep.
120 something. So either you're writing quicker, or I'm interviewing slower, or some combination of the two. But I figured, Jessica's great return is a nice opportunity to catch up with you. So before we go between the lines, I did want to ask you a few questions about this new book for readers who might like a taste
Sure.
who haven't read it yet. So, as I mentioned, it's Death on the Emerald Isle. So Jessica, of course, does travel to Ireland, where things are very green and very lush and beautiful. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, about the case that she finds herself in this book.
Okay. This was actually a dream come true for me because I was surprised when I first started writing the Murder, She Wrote books to find out that although Jessica had been to Ireland any number of times in the TV show, she had never been there in any of the books. Scotland, England, yeah, but she never was in Ireland. And I was like, okay, so in the TV show, she was in Cork, she was here, she was there. Let's go to the north. So the premise of the story is that another American writer was supposed to go to Belfast in Northern Ireland to accept the American Author of the Year award at the Belfast Book Festival, and the woman broke her leg. So she asked Jessica to fill in at the last minute. Jessica's neighbor, Maeve O'Bannon, has cousins in Bushmills, which is not far from Belfast in Northern Ireland. And she has some family paintings she asked Jessica to take to Bushmills after she finishes in Belfast. So Jessica does. She goes to Belfast. We see a lot of Belfast, including the Titanic Museum, which was, really interesting. We find out a lot about the history of the area, the history of the Titanic. And then one of Maeve's cousins comes to, his name is Owen, he's the son of a cousin, comes to Belfast, picks Jess up and brings her to Bushmills. When she gets to Bushmills, it turns out that the family owns a family business. They are in the process of merging their business with a French corporation. So there are Frenchmen also staying at Bushmills in the same hotel as Jessica's. How many hotels are there in Bushmills? It's this big. And they all go to a family dinner. And there is a bit of tension, but it looks to be mostly about the business. And the next day, Jess is out riding her bicycle, and she comes across a car, and there's a man slumped over, and she goes to poke him to see if he's all right. And it is Maeve's cousin, Michael, the doctor, who's the medical front for the firm, because they make cosmetics from seaweed, which apparently is very popular. And now Michael's dead, and Jess has found the body. So you can guess from there, there are lovely policemen who initially do not want this American woman who has discovered the body to have anything to do with anything, but she does sort of win them over. She also spends a lot of time exploring places because there are things she's looking for. And she picks up quite a sidekick in the form of a woman named Maggie Noland, who is the daughter of the hotel owner and also happens to be engaged to Owen O'Bannon. So that's generally the story, and you can guess as to how far and how long it takes Jessica to straighten this mess all out. But there are business issues, there are personal issues. The Frenchmen actually have a larger role in everything that goes on than I anticipated in the beginning. Characters are amazing. They just say, no, I'm not done yet, and you've got to go with them. So, but that is the story. And again, I picked Northern Ireland for two reasons. And I was very non-parochial. My family is from Derry in the north, and there is no Derry in this book. I stayed on the other coast. But because of the Angela Lansbury connection to Ireland, and we were very, very fortunate that we were able to pull the print. It was literally stop the presses and change the dedication of the book so it could be dedicated to Angela, which I felt, I mean, if we couldn't have, I would have dedicated the next one. But since this is Ireland, she was Irish. Her mother was born in Ireland. Angela considered herself, I mean, she had citizenship in England, Ireland, and the United States. Right. So that was a very, I was really happy we could do that. My agent called me and I was like, yes, let's see if we could do it. And the editor was ready, and it was just a question of the print guys. And they were very, very cooperative. Everybody was very cooperative. And then people started to ask me if the book was going to be and I kept telling them I didn't know, because I never got the feedback whether the print guys made it or not. I didn't know until shortly before the book came out. I finally asked.
Right.
But that was the thing. So this is, in my world, Angela Lansbury's Irish book. I mean, she wasn't from the north, but this is her, you know, this is even more her book. They're all her.
Right.
But this one is particularly her.
Yeah, I mean, how fitting is that? And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to read the dedication real quickly.
No, that's fine.
Very simple and graceful and perfect. So the dedication is to Angela Lansbury, whose talent and grace brought Jessica Fletcher to life. I mean, I think that that's just poetic and beautiful. And I have to think, too, you know, what a gift for you writing the Jessica Fletcher character to be able to think back on Angela Lansbury, because we know what she looks like. We know what she sounds like. What a great lady, yes, you know, she was, both as herself and as Jessica Fletcher. And that has to be kind of a writer's best friend.
Yes, absolutely. You don't. I have said, I just filled out a thing for something that's going to be online, and they asked me who the hardest character I write, it is, who was the hardest in this book. And I said, it's Angela Lansbury, Jessica Fletcher. See, I'm doing it now. It's Jessica Fletcher because I have a relationship with her like a buddy since 1984. But that's not what, my vision of her is what my vision is. Everybody who's watched the show for all these years and read the books has their own relationship with her. People will say all the time, oh, I read this book, whichever one it is, and she would never do that. Well, yes, she would, because people have good days and bad days, and people change, and they're not static. And, I have a vision of her that is a friendship.
Right.
Because she was in my life for so long, and I have to step back from that. And, but she's just, as you said, Angela Lansbury is such a gracious person, no matter what she does.
Right.
You watch her in movies, no matter what you see her, that inner self comes through.
Absolutely. And I remember reading at one point, that people had so tied her and the character together that there would be readers who would go up to her in public and have her sign books thinking that she was literally Jessica Fletcher in the flesh. And she would do it because she
read that too.
Connection.
I read that. She said to Dawn Bain one time that when people, tell her how much they enjoy her writing the books, she just says, thank you. Like, well, I explained it. And Dawn had said at something I was at with him years ago, that people are often disappointed when he shows up without her.
Right.
Yeah. And I've had people, when I wrote the first book, people ask me all the time, well, did you meet Angela Lansbury? What is she? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but she has a personal and private life. Right. Doesn't include me.
It's so true. And it's, you mentioned Donald Bain, who wrote, oh my gosh, I don't even know, the first 40 some odd.
47.
47. See, you would know. And his wife and daughter collaborated on several of them as well. But there's actually a fun little reference in this book that, people who've been reading them all along, I think will appreciate. But you actually go way back to his very, very first book, Gin and Daggers, and you sort of mentioned that case and the characters that Jessica got to know there. I loved it. Yeah, like 50 some odd books later, you bring it right back to the beginning, and the real fans are just going to be like, I remember that story, that book, those characters.
Well, I think it's good once in a while. Time marches on.
It does.
And again, characters are not static, but they do have memories. And just like you'll walk down the street and you'll see something and it'll trigger a memory, I would think that anytime she crossed the ocean, she would think of, this woman was her mentor. Well, she was like an Agatha Christie. I mean, that was the character, right. As I read her. She was like an Agatha Christie, and yet she was a great mentor and friend to Jessica Fletcher. So you don't forget people like that.
Right. And then people like me who've been reading these books for decades, it's a beautiful moment. So I will also say to people, if you're like me and you don't get out of your house much these days, let alone, out of the state or across the world, this is such a wonderful trip, to Ireland. Viscerally, you feel like you're there. It really is a great escape. And you get an awesome, murder mystery as well. But it's also sort of a trip. It really is. I felt like I was immersed in Ireland, and with the exception of visiting, through Murder, She Wrote episodes and movies, I've never been. But this is as close as I will get anytime soon, and it's a really fun experience to have. So
that was also part of the plan. Again, because it was important to her as a country. Clearly, it was important to Angela, and also because it was important to her, Jessica visited many times.
Right.
And when you see the TV episodes, whenever Jessica goes to a place, they do try to show you a little bit of what happens in that place, you know. And I always think that books should do the same thing. I've traveled way more in books than I've traveled.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, we all have, you know. I forget, years ago when the Russian guy became a Gorky Park. I think that was the book. And we were all like, Russia. I think of Russia as this big communist place with,
Right.
Khrushchev jumping around, banging his shoe on the table. And you can tell how old I am that I remember Khrushchev banging his shoe on the table. But, you don't think, yeah, but the same things go on there that go on here. They have, robberies and murders and things. And, it was just amazing. So I think that's good. We
Absolutely.
go,
It's a great escape. So I
yep,
highly recommend it. Of course I would. But it's funny, we've been watching Murder, She Wrote in reverse order in my house for a couple months now. So we finally made it back to season 4. But I had forgotten how many times Jessica went to Ireland, because I feel like I'm a bit more acquainted with the books than the show these days. And like you said, there surprisingly was never a book set in
yes.
Ireland until now. But revisiting the show, you really do see it appear rather frequently. So this is sort of a great tie into that. And it really sort of enhances the experience, because, you get to see it in a very visual format. And then, of course, you get it in this book where you get to bring your own feelings and experiences to it. So anyone who enjoys the show, and particularly Jessica's trips to Ireland, I mean, they're going to eat up this book. It's one of those things you start reading and it just goes ridiculously quickly, but you find yourself very, very satisfied. And I will say, there will be some good news for Murder, She Wrote fans. We will come back to that shortly, but we're now going to transition to Between the Lines. So this will be a bit more rapid fire. Are you ready, Terrie?
I am ready.
I know you are. All right, so
I
I'm going to
am.
take you a trip back in time. So as a child, did you wear your literary lust loud and proud, or were you a closet bibliophile?
Loud and proud, baby, loud and proud.
That's right, you
Always.
were my kind of person. I knew it.
I came from a family of readers. So it was not, I mean, there was no need to pretend you were, playing with screwdrivers and hammers and stuff, because it would not be uncommon to see my father in that corner in the chair reading a book, my mother laying on the couch reading a book, my brother. I used to go down to the store. This is the truth. The newspapers, the Daily News and they were 4 cents each. The Daily News and the Daily Mirror would come out between 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night. And I used to go down 5 flights of stairs to the candy store next door and buy the News and the Mirror and bring them up, and we would all take pieces. And, I actually read the news part of it by the time I was maybe 9 or 10. But mostly my brother and I fought about the comics. We both wanted to
Sure.
read them first, that was the thing. But that was not uncommon at night for me to bring up the paper and everybody to just pick a piece. So I could be loud and proud as I wanted to. I was
I
very
love that.
fortunate.
I think there's
Yeah.
something to be said for the family that reads together. And to your point, I think that my parents probably wished I would occasionally, pick up a hammer and screwdriver and learn some kind of useful skill, but it never really happened.
Well, TV does interfere too, because like I could be in my room reading and my mother would come in and say, such and such is on TV. We're going to watch whatever it is. And I'd be like, no, that's all right. I'll read my book. And they never said, you got to come,
Right.
which was a good thing. And I'm
It is,
sure there were
absolutely.
times that my mother would have preferred, like, she liked that whole family in one room thing. But the TV noise interfered with my books. So
I understand that very well. All right, so let me ask you a little bit more specifically, if you can recall, other than the newspapers that you mentioned and you and your brother enjoying the comics, are there any specific books or authors that you can recall grabbing your attention at an early age that you would like to talk about for a few moments?
Yes. I lived, as I mentioned, in a fifth floor walk-up. Next to us was a two-story building that was Robert Hall's men's clothing store. And across from that was a park. And the name of the park was Edgar Allan Poe Park because Edgar Allan Poe's house was in the park. He lived there when his wife died, and he lived there. Technically, he died in Baltimore, I think, but that was still his home. So I guess I was like 11 or 12. We used to go hang out in the park, hang out in his house.
Right.
I can show you the bed where Virginia died, all this stuff. They had docents that used to try to keep us under control. The little tiny house. So I started reading Poe and his short stories and his poems. And that got me interested in mysteries. So that kind of led me to Trixie Belden, Judy Bolton, Nancy Drew. That led me to the Golden Age writers, Agatha Christie, Mary Roberts Reinhardt. And as a kid, there were a bunch of like Daddy Longlegs, Heidi. These were books that were independent. They weren't parts of series. They were standalones, I guess we call them now. But they were very... Oh, and I never realized, the girl in Daddy Longlegs, although I took that as more of a romance in some ways, but she wanted to be a writer. I wasn't focused on that. And again, in my house, we could read anything that was in the house, and I became in love with very early my father's American history books. So basically, plus in the old days, here I go, in the old days, Red Book Magazine, all these different magazines. Red Book Magazine had 4 short stories in it, every issue.
Wow.
So you could read. My Aunt Marie gave me a subscription to Ellery Queen magazine when I was 14, and I've had a subscription to Queen ever since. There was also a couple of other, I didn't get a subscription to Hitchcock till I was like close to 20, but there was like Mike Shane, there were all these mystery magazines, and there were pamphlet magazines that had all the current song lyrics in them. It was 15 cents. And you could tell whether you had the issue or not by the color. It would be green, then it would be yellow, then it would be pink, then it would be blue. So if the pink one was up there and I didn't have it, I would scrounge up 15 cents to buy it. So we could read the lyrics. Why you want to read the lyrics without the music, I have no idea, but we all did. So there was a lot for us to read, never mind comic books.
Right.
When I was 3rd grade, I got straight A's on my report card. My father was a New York City fireman, and firemen are great tradesmen. They trade everything. And some guy took a batch of comic books away from one of his kids and brought it into the firehouse if anybody wanted it. So my father took them for me and gave them to me as a present for my straight A report card. And I read all these comic books, Beetle Bailey, there was a lot to read. So now, I mean, you have to go to a bookstore. We used to get this stuff in the candy store.
Right.
The candy stores used to have libraries. So you could, when the new books came out, I mean, I couldn't do it because it was money, but my mother did it, my father didn't. You would pay the guy like a quarter, I think, something, for 3 days. And then it was a nickel a day. So they didn't have to wait on the line in the real library to get it for free if they would pay a couple of cents. Reading was a big thing. And it was available everywhere. I lived around the corner from the library.
Right.
Yeah, so I read a lot.
Well, look at you. Well, now you write things that we can go to the bookstore or the library and find it. I mean,
that never occurred to me at the time.
I know, right? But it was very impactful, and good on mom for letting you read through TV, because obviously it's paid off in the long run.
Well, yeah, because it was the time that we used to go when I was little. We used to go to the ice cream parlor to watch television. So when you had a television in the house, that was a big deal.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
And the fact that I didn't want to watch it to read a book, you're right. I mean,
You're a
I'm
radical
sure it
reader.
disappointed her often, but
But I think that's great. It sounds like your mom had perspective though and realized, books
yeah,
are probably better than TV. And in the long run, I think you win. You were winning,
yep,
Terrie.
absolutely.
So we're going to switch gears from things that are a bit older to right now. I'm wondering if you can tell us, what are you currently reading, if you are actually reading something at the moment, and do you have any impressions that you would care to share?
I do, and I can,
Excellent.
and I will.
I love it.
I am reading Walking with the Wind by John Lewis. This is my father, the American history buff. I have to tell you that John Lewis has been an idol of mine for most of my life. I admit to the fact that when he was still alive and in Congress, I used to call his office every year and tell them to make sure he's eating properly and exercising, because I'm sure there were people worked in his office and went, the lunatic called again. But I used to, he doesn't represent me. I have nothing to do with him, but he was so young when he got involved in the movement. But anyway, what impresses me, this is a memoir of the movement, but if anybody wants to look at it, the most important part is the prologue. He talks about when he was a child, there was a big storm, and they happened that there were like 15 kids, all cousins, in one aunt's house. And when the storm came, the wind started to raise the house, because none of these houses are like they're on stilts and stuff. Right. They don't have basements. So the adult had all of the kids get in a line and walk into the corner so that their weight would fight the wind, and then the wind would hit another, and they would walk into the corner. And basically, he uses that as the example of, that's why the title is Walking with the Wind. He uses that as the example of teamwork, fighting against big things together. You can win. You can defeat it. You can stand up for yourself. And I cried after I read the prologue, so it took me a while to get to the next chapter. It's, but that is what I'm reading now. My fiction, just for a quickie, sure. In Place of Fear by Katrina McPherson. And the reason I'm reading this is because when I walked into the library, it was on the shelf like this. You know how they put them out like that? And I was like, oh, Katrina's new book. It's also takes place in Edinburgh, of course, as much of her stuff does. But it's also quite historical. It's about the beginning of the National Health Service right after World War II. And I found the historical aspects of that quite interesting. So those are my two. Katrina's going to go back to the library on Tuesday, but John will be here for a while.
That's right. That's incredible. So there, you've made mom and dad proud now with your reading. So
yes,
excellent. Okay, so what one book or author do you always feel comfortable recommending when asked, regardless of who it is that's asking you?
Oh, okay, this is great, and I'm going to get in trouble, and I don't care. It's Laura Childs, absolutely. Now, the interesting thing about my recommending Laura is, we did write together, so we have become friends. Most people adore her tea shop mysteries, and I like them. I love them. Theodosia and Drayton, great protagonist and sidekick. I wrote 4 of the New Orleans series, this, I can't think of what you call scrapbooking series with her. So I like those. but I love her Cackleberry Club series. It's the shortest, it's the fewest books. So I tell people all the time, read Laura, anything she writes is great, but I really love the Cackleberries and you should try it. Susanna, Petra, Tony, you will love them. Susanna's very level-headed. Tony is always off, and Petra tries to just keep peace. They're great girls. And she would be the author. And because she's so versatile, you could go in any direction, but start with the Cackleberry Club.
I love that. And, I think that says everything. That if you will recommend the books that you did not collaborate on,
Yeah.
for the ones that you did. So, I mean, what more can you say? I think that says everything.
Because everybody has a taste. It's like if we go out to dinner, the odds are if there's 6 people, we're going to order at least 5, if not 6, completely different meals. So why should we all be, I have to have this is egg drop soup, Cackleberry Club. Why should we all be, it's just not right that everybody has to read the same book. That's like, no, I don't like it. I won't do it.
I like it. You're a little bit of a rebel, but in a nice way.
A lot of a rebel, yeah.
A lot of a rebel, but you can pull it off.
Yeah.
All right. So sort of the flip side to that then, is there a book or an author that you have always been meaning to read and just somehow have not yet gotten around to? I have a lot of those.
This is tough. Louise Penny.
Really?
Louise Penny. Now, Inspector Gamache, is that how you say
Yep.
it? Okay. I kept meaning to read her. I have no reason not to read her. And if you noticed lately, because they did a TV streaming of a bunch of the stories,
Right.
now it's all over. People are arguing, this one they made better than that one, and the story was better in the book, and and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, because I still haven't read any of it. Like, what did I do? What did I do? I don't know. I'm gonna remedy that someday, soon. But it's embarrassing. And you don't even realize until this TV thing blew up.
Right.
And everybody was, and I was like, I never read one of them, not one. I mean,
I understand. So many books, so little time, well intended, but you can't read everything.
Yeah, no, it's true. But she's on my list.
And it's hard too, because with someone like Louise Penny, there are so many books now that it's hard to go back knowing that, once you do, you're going to want to read everything. And, there's just so many hours in the day.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I don't have modern televisions.
Right.
So I can't do streaming or anything. But I do like the guy, Molina, I think his name is.
Right, Alfred Molina, yeah.
Alfred Molina, who and I thought, I think I would like the character, and I really would like, but now I don't, even if I could, like, go to my kid's house or something and watch the streaming thing, I don't want to watch it because I didn't read the books.
Right, and they're never quite the same. You
can't watch it if you didn't read the book. I mean, it's like,
I agree. I agree with you there. I have to tell you my funny Louise Penny story. I will digress for a quick second.
No, go ahead.
But like you, I realized that somehow I had missed most of her books, and this was several years ago now. So I've somewhat remedied that. I've read some of them, and they've been fantastic. But I met her because they sent her to R.J. Julia in Madison, Connecticut, which is our state's, very famed, esteemed independent bookstore. And so when she came to town, I couldn't miss it. And I remember meeting her, and I had a stack of every single one of her books up until, what she had just released. And I had her sign all of them. I don't know what possessed me, but I told her that I hadn't actually read any of them yet. And so, she sort of made a mental note of that. And then they sent her back the following year with her new hardcover. And I went, and I don't know how she remembered this, but she remembered me. She remembered that at that point, the year before, I hadn't read any of her books. And so then in front of her entire audience, she asked me if I'd finally picked one up. But in the nicest way possible. I mean, she was just being funny, and it was completely
Yeah.
like humorous. It wasn't like a dig at me, but I'm like, oh my gosh, of course you would remember that. But yes,
Yes.
I have read several now, and they're all wonderful. And I love that, again, they're all a little bit different. So, it's that the same but different, and she's not afraid to take some creative risks, which I think is great because it's kept things fresh. But I guess we both have a little catching up to do on Louise Penny, huh?
Apparently so, but if I meet her, I'm never going to tell her that I didn't. I'll just say, I'm not like John.
Yeah, you're not like that guy.
I'm not
But
like
she was so
John.
funny. I mean, she was the sweetest, person, but it was just funny that, she would remember that. And I would be stupid enough to say, hey, I've never actually read any of these, but, she was quite happy to sign them.
Absolutely. Because a lot of times if authors do a signing, people come with books or buy books that they haven't read. And you're happy that you're going to read them.
I know. And she was like,
Someday,
well,
John,
hey,
someday.
right? And she was like, hey, you may not have read them yet, but you just bought them all, and that's A-OK in my book.
Oh,
Everybody wins. All right, so now I'm going to ask you about your own books. So you have written several now. You've got a good selection to choose from. If you had to pick just one of the books that you've written or collaborated on to suggest to a reader, which one would it be and why?
Well Read Then Dead, which was the first of the beach books. And the reason is because, as everybody knows, Hurricane Ian devastated Fort Myers Beach. I mean, I have a mailbox. Those people can't get mail delivery. Their new congressman is fighting with the postmaster to try to get them, set up things for delivery. Fort Myers Beach is a beautiful place. It's going to be again. So anybody who wants to know what Fort Myers Beach was like, Well Read Then Dead, or the two books that followed it, but I always think people like to start with the first book.
Absolutely.
Will give you an idea of the beauty of that community, of the people, of the places. It's actually the setting for the protagonist and her sidekick is a cafe called the Read 'em and Eat Cafe. And people have messaged me and said, I know that's not a real place, but where would it be if it was in Fort Myers Beach? And we actually settled on down the block from the post office around, like we did a whole thing. Because I had no idea when I picked it as a location how popular it was nationally, at least on the East Coast, as a vacation spot. So I want everybody to know it's coming back. Everybody there is working very hard. Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville Corporation was opening a Margaritaville there, and they intend to go forward. The community people are working really hard. The shopkeepers, there's a light post. They have a little place, it's in the books, called Times Square, because it's like a pier and an ice cream parlor and stuff like that. And a big, I call it a light post, but it's a clock, a four-sided clock, which is why it's Times Square. And the clock is up again. It was taken out by Ian, but the clock is up again. There's so many things that, I mean, the library there is magnificent, and that's going to take time. Everything is going to take time, but it will be done because people are so, as I say, Well Read Then Dead. If you don't want to read that, read Read to Death. Read Caught Red-Handed. It is great beach reading, and the great beach is Fort Myers Beach. So that's my little speech for today. But that I really my heart breaks for that community.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I can't even, for a while I could look at the pictures and the videos. Now I can't even do that.
Right.
They're in such bad shape.
Right.
But it's an island and it got overwhelmed.
Yeah, it happens. But like you said, community spirit, they're going to come back strong. But it's funny because you write these things and you don't necessarily think that they're going to stand in testament to something. And now these books, really
No,
a testament
I
to what was,
know.
but also what will be. So
Yeah,
suggestion.
absolutely. It's important. It's very, very important. And I mean, not just Hurricane Ian in Fort Myers Beach. It's what California is going through now. I belong to a Zoom group of girls, I say that I went to high school with. And one of the messages that came around this morning was, who's got mud in her garage? Because a few of them live in California. And, I said back to them, we're all praying for you, be patient, but people get hit with tornadoes. People get hit, any day that you don't get hit is a good day.
Absolutely.
Because everybody gets hit by something.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to be a downer, but
no, not at all. I think that that's a really good point. And again, to the power of books, we can all sort of celebrate and enjoy what was and think of what's to come. All right, so let me ask you this. I have no idea what you're going to say to this question, but I'm always interested. So is there a book or an author that you will admit to reading that people who know you might be surprised to know that you actually liked or enjoyed, that maybe they wouldn't necessarily think fit with your personality? Like, are you going to tell me like you're a 50 Shades of Grey kind of lady?
Oh no, I tried. I couldn't get 12 pages in, and everybody kept saying you have to, and I kept saying okay. So no, that's not me. Apparently, I can tell you what is me.
Please do. I was going to say, okay, I'm not completely scandalized, so now I'll probably be okay.
Okay, the book is, and I've owned this book for 50 years or so. In fact, I own a paperback. It's in pieces, wrapped in a rubber band, in a plastic bag. And I keep saying I'm going to get a copy for my Kindle, and I never do. The book is called Plain Speaking. It's an oral biography of Harry S. Truman, who is one of my top favorite presidents. Sure. He and John Adams compete for #1 all the time. And it was written by a guy named Merle Miller, who for the first 25 years I owned the book, I thought was a girl, but it's a guy. Harry Truman is the first president I remember.
Right.
Like, I remember him being president. I also remember when he wasn't president anymore, he used to come to New York and walk down Fifth Avenue with a cane, and the TV crews would follow him because TV was a big deal. And he would yell at them, and it was very entertaining. My father used to call the poor operators in Independence, Missouri, after Truman was no longer president, and leave messages for Harry Truman. So I was enamored long before the book ever came out. I thought this man, between him and General Eisenhower, who my mother used to pet us on the head every night when we went to sleep and say, we don't have to worry about anything now because General Eisenhower is in the White House. This is how I grew up. No wonder I read these books, right? But Truman was a very plain-spoken, but very outspoken. He's the buck stops here. Right. And, basically, you don't like it, too bad I did it, and I can do it. And the other thing that I love about Harry Truman is talking about being in a spot, which he was, when President Roosevelt died, they basically had no political relationship. So he didn't, we had an atom bomb. We were at war. We had an atom bomb. Truman didn't know it, and he was vice president. I mean, today, vice presidents and presidents have a much closer relationship, at least in most cases. They know the basic stuff in case the president falls in the shower and, fractures his skull. But he had to pick up from the beginning, and he also had to do things to help the world recover from the war. It wasn't going to be enough to help us recover. Plus, you have the Marshall Plan and all this stuff. And when you hear him in the book talk about just things in general, I love that he talks like he's talking in my living room. Now, there are people who will say that the book was not historically always correct, but in his mind it is.
Sure.
That he was the guy, and this is how he was thinking.
Right.
And that's so true of us all. I can only show you the vision I have. So that's my book, and I am going to get it on my Kindle. I really am, so I could keep looking at it. Because now when I take it out, I read 3 pages and 4 more pages fall out, and I'm
Oh, I know, but that's a great suggestion, and I think maybe someday you should write a biography of him. And like you said, it can be plain spoken but outspoken. The Harry Truman Story by Terrie Farley Moran.
Woo! Imagine.
I know more to aspire to, as if you haven't done it. All right, how about this? So, who is the one author that would or did make you weak in the knees upon meeting? Have you met that person? And if not, who would that person be for you? Would it be Harry Truman? Would it be somebody else?
Oh, it would be Harry, except that in the writing world, my best story about making a fool of myself when I met somebody was Michael Connelly. I was at San Francisco BoucherCon, and when I was going, a friend of mine who was a big fan of Connelly said to me, "Is Michael Connelly going to be there?" And I said, "Yeah." They said, "We'll just ignore that." He said to me, "Could you get him to sign a book?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sure, no problem." Then I went to the conference, completely forgot. So here we are, we're at the conference. I'm hanging out with a bunch of friends. We get invited to a party. I go to the party, and it's in a restaurant. There's no room at the tables. There's no room any place. So we sit at the bar. One of my girlfriends is telling a great story, and we're laughing and moving around, and I'm in the last seat of my group, and I start, and I'm leaning back, laughing and carrying on, and I realize that I have now moved well into the area of this man next to me. And as I turn around to, straighten out my chair, it's Michael Connelly. And he's alone.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, so I said to him, "Oh, excuse me," as if I leaned into him on purpose. "Excuse me, Mr. Connelly, will you be signing tomorrow?" And he said, "No, I'm leaving in the morning." And I said,
no.
"Well, have a safe trip." And I moved as far away from him as possible. And then my girlfriend's saying to me, "Why don't you talk to him? He's by himself." And I'm like, he don't want to talk to us. He wants to talk to, people like him. Like, I don't know who I think people like him are, So that was my embarrassing Michael Connelly story. I mean, I didn't embarrass him. I embarrassed myself. But the good news was, I said to my friend, "He's leaving," and I was supposed to get a book signed. And they said, "Hey, guys like Connelly, they go to all the local bookstores." So there's a bookstore 3 blocks from the hotel. We went to the bookstore. There was a stack of signed Connellys. I brought one home for my friend. I was a heroine.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And, that's when you stretch the truth a little more and say, "Hey, I had drinks with Michael Connelly so I could get you this book."
I shut it at the door. I was so embarrassed. You would think. I don't know what, where my head was. But I guess I just turned to apologize that I had encroached on the person's space. And then I went, click. Oh, my God. So that's my Michael Connelly story.
Oh, that's great. Well, who thinks you're going to be on a bar stool and there's going to be Michael Connelly sitting alone next to you?
I know. I know. And I mean, I'm sure he was meeting people. Everybody was, the conferences, it's all crazy.
That's a great story, though. I think there are going to be a lot of people who appreciate that because, I mean, Michael Connelly, superstar.
Yep.
All right, so how about this? Has there been an I've made it moment in your career? And if not, do you know what that moment would be were it to happen?
There has not been, although a lot of people would look at my career and say, oh, there certainly has been several. Because in my world, writing is a job. Publishing is a business. If you think of it that way, there is no made it moment. I mean, you could be called into your boss's office on a Monday morning and they say to you, oh, the presentation you made last Thursday was fabulous. You are our best presenter, blah, blah, blah. And then they call you in Thursday and tell you they're downsizing by 12 people and you're number 11. That's the real world. And writing is the real world. I mean, it's nice I get to do it in my house and I don't have to take the subway. But I mean, the reason there's only 3 beach books was that's because the third one came out the summer that Berkley decided they were cutting back on cozies.
Right.
And anybody who, I can't even tell you, somebody mentioned that there were 80 of us. I don't know how many got cut, but there was a bunch of them. Now, I didn't lose my contract because I was already writing with Laura.
Right.
So I've been with Berkley since 2014. But that was just a stroke of luck. The other thing is, if people ask me to do stuff, I generally say yes.
Sure.
I mean, oh, what the heck, we'll try it. We'll see if it works out. But I have no illusions about that there is any level. When we had that bad summer, when everybody got cut, there was someone, and I wasn't familiar with her. I wasn't friends with her or anything, but she had written 22 books.
Oh my gosh.
And they cut her.
Right.
So I'm not complaining about getting cut after 3. And then people were like, well, it's because Berkley had a habit of publishing at least one new series every month. Every month a first book in a new series came out. So the new people didn't want that process. And, some writers would say, well, then they published too many books. And I was like, yeah, but if they hadn't, maybe they never would have published us. You don't know.
Right.
It is a business. Writing is a job. When they tell you the book is due January, whatever, it's due that day. If your editor says, here's your copy edits, we need them back in 6 days, you got to get them back in 6 days. It's like any other job. So I have no illusion, the Pulitzer Prize. No, well, I write cozies. This, it's what I think it's Toni Kellner said one time when people were talking about the Edgars, and she said, but we write cozies. The Edgars don't go to cozy writers. You have to be realistic about what you do for a living. I am a writer. I write. You give me something to write. You ask me for something to write, I'll write it. That doesn't mean you're ever going to ask me for anything else. So that's it. So no, in terms of, I don't think there's ever going to be a magic moment.
Sure, that's fair enough. It's good perspective, though, because, I mean, it is a job, it is a business, and I think a lot of people who haven't actually worked in the industry think it's sort of, like this idealized dream, and you have a book out and now all of a sudden you're super successful and you have lots of money, and
well, if they only knew how little money there is.
I was gonna say it's not a glamorous job.
It's not a glamorous job. And the other thing is, this is always very funny. one of the nurses at one of my doctor's offices said to me one time, "Oh, doctor told me you write books." I said, "Yeah." So she said, "So what do you do? Do you light candles and meditate?" And I was like, "No, I sit in the computer and bang my head against the screen until words come out, you know." I mean, people have an idea that it's this big creative endeavor. And of course, there's creativity to it, but it's a job.
Yeah.
And who's the famous author? They argue about who it was who said, "I only write when I'm inspired. Fortunately, I am inspired at 9 o'clock every morning."
Yeah. And it's true because, unless you're Stephen King, they want book after book after book after book, and there's a certain expectation. And if you don't meet it, you don't meet it. And then they will find somebody else who will. So that's good perspective. So this probably will be an odd follow-up question, given the reality of that answer. But do you have a great literary ambition? Is there something you aspire to other than to continue to write and to write the best book that you can time and time again? And if that is your great literary ambition, that's fine, because I think there's something to be said for being consistent.
No, I do recognize that at some point in time, I will retire. I mean, that having said that, my literary goal would be, when I have the time, my ambition is to have enough time each day to read an entire book.
Ooh, I like
and
that.
alternate between fiction and nonfiction, because I do have my little addiction to American history books and biographies. But that to me is a literary ambition worth having, that I could just, as long as I'm writing, I will never have that amount of time. But to just be able to walk into the library and take home 10 books.
Yes.
And read and then show up in the library, 11 days later and bring those back and take out 10 more. I mean, when you think about it, most books you can read in 3 or 4 hours.
Right.
But you don't get 3 or 4 hours.
Right.
I want the 3 or 4 hours every single day.
That's what that. I'm going to steal your ambition. That sounds really good.
You could have it. I will share. Yeah.
That would be fantastic. All right, so how about this? And I think we've already gotten a bit of a sense of this, because obviously, the things that you were interested in as a child are things that you are still clearly interested in now. But in looking back, how would you say that your life in reading and writing informs the way that you live day to day?
All right, so my first book crush, I was 14, and this is another unbelievable, but my first book crush was Thomas Paine.
Okay.
A guy named Howard Fast, yes, used to write biographies, fictionalized biographies of famous people. And he wrote a book called Citizen Tom Paine, which I read. And Thomas Paine is actually not as well known for his part in the American Revolution, in the causing of the revolution, as he should be. So with Thomas Paine, what I learned was, and as soon as after I read the book, I went out and got a copy of Common Sense. I mean, Common Sense is like this little tiny pamphlet where he talks all these colonists into rebelling. I mean, he was the original, we don't need these English people, guys, let's go. I learned from him, that I have an obligation to support democracy and to do what I'm supposed to do. Pay attention to candidates, pay attention to issues, vote. Minimally, you should vote. And speak up. And I also learned from him in a roundabout way that doesn't necessarily lead to success. It's just what you should be doing, that we're all the same and we all should be doing that. So that I came to very early. I mean, and of course it didn't hurt that I turned 14 in 1960. So it was the beginning of a decade of change and young people thinking they should have responsibility. Um, what I learned from writing increased my personal discipline. If I don't write it, I can't sell it. If you don't if you don't have discipline for anything that you're doing, I used to paint pictures. And sometimes, and it's just like writing a book, you look at the painting when you're halfway through and you go, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And then you finish it and it's not half bad, but you have to have the discipline to finish it. You have to have, like people sometimes think discipline is overrated, that, we should all just do things we love. Well, even things you love, you can't do without discipline. So writing has really taught me the need for discipline. I don't miss deadlines. I do what needs to be done because that's what I'm supposed to do. And in writing, there's not a lot of latitude.
Right.
I mean, there isn't, because a whole bunch of people are having book cover conferences before I wrote the book. I mean, then there's printing people, there's editor people, there's all these people who, if I don't do my piece, they can't do theirs.
Absolutely.
So it's not just me and the reader. There's all these other people that make this happen. Bookstores expect deliveries on time. The delivery can't go on time if the book isn't printed. And, there's all these steps in the process before we get to printer. So discipline is a big thing.
Absolutely. And like you said, discipline gets things done. And as the writer, you certainly don't want to be the cog in the machine that keeps the book from happening. So
I never understand that. I mean, it does happen, and it can happen for serious reasons, and that's totally different. But I don't understand the concept when you know how many people, and of course, part of it was probably from my earlier careers as well. But in this, it's very visual. It's a book. If you don't do your piece and get it in on time, these people are waiting to do their piece. And if they're not on time, then they're going to fall behind with somebody else's work. I mean, it's so intertwined. It's the same people. My editor doesn't just edit me. She edits like a million people.
right.
So if she says she needs it by, whatever date, if I screw that up, then she's getting my book when she should be working on someone else's. Writing reinforces discipline. I don't know that you would last very long in this field if you couldn't find the discipline to be on time and hand in, everything, because you send it to them, they send it back to you, then you send it to them and they send it goes back and forth and back and forth. And they have it all scheduled out. Like, that's why people get crazy. Like this book, Emerald Isle, was supposed to be released in November, and they moved it to December. And everybody in the readership community went insane. And I said to them, I've published 11 books, and this is the third one that's had a date change.
Right.
Well, why? I don't know why. Somewhere in the process, there's a reason. One of them was moved because of the paper shortage in the pandemic.
Sure.
But I mean, there's a million reasons. Somebody, couldn't do something, got sick. More books came in late, or more books came in early. I don't know. I don't question it. They tell me, I say, okay.
Right. There you go. Well, I just say, as a reader, I open this book and there are words on the page, and I'm
Yep,
happy. You know, like all right, well,
exactly.
Terry's done her
But it
job.
takes a lot of people to get to that point. And then there's the redo when the paperback comes out,
Yeah.
and the redo when the large print comes out. So you're doing all of that stuff while you're writing a book, and you're doing all of like now I'm doing the PR for Emerald Isle, and you could be doing PR for one book, copy edits for another book, I mean, and you got to do it all by the day, because whatever day they tell you, that's what you do.
Yeah, and it's funny too because people put out a book, and I think as readers we don't always remember that they're usually in the midst of another book or probably completing another book at the same time. And this was written maybe a year ago, and I always wonder how do writers even remember what they wrote because they're fully immersed in a completely different story by the time
It's
we're
very
actually.
difficult. I have an appointment to speak to some people about the last book, Killer on the Court, in March. Now, I laughed and I automatically said, "Oh, that's a great segue for Emerald Isle. It's St. Patrick's Day." And the lady said to me, "Yes, but we'll be talking about Killer on the Court." I went, "Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that
right.
one.
Okay, I could do that."
You can't. Well, okay. Here's what I'm going to say. And for anybody who missed our first interview, Terry and I chatted about Killer on the Court when it came out. So if you need a refresher, or if Terry needs a refresher, you can just look up that video and
We
hear it
know
all.
right where to look.
But all right. So I have to ask you now, us Murder, She Wrote readers, we are a ravenous bunch. So of course, we're very, very happy that we now have Death on the Emerald Isle to read and enjoy. But we're also waiting for the next book, and the book that comes after that book. And I did mention at the start of the show that we had some good news to share. I know that people have been asking you, what you're at liberty to divulge about Jessica's next adventures, and if you will be writing more books in this series. And it sounds like the answer is yes. So what can you tell us to make us all happy tonight?
I can tell you this. Jessica will be staying home in Cabot Cove for her next adventure. I can also tell you that, to the best of my knowledge, and I always preface this with, the writer is the last to know. I never know anything. People tell me, "Oh, the book came out in large print." Oh, that's not, I had no idea. I don't know anything. But I can tell you that, based on projections, the next book will not come out until 2024. There will be no further books. Usually we do 2 a year. But I guess between the rollback of this one and other commitments that the publisher had with Universal Studios, who owns the rights, and they had all these conversations and signed an agreement that I know nothing about. But Jessica's, the next time we see Jessica, we will probably also see Loretta and a couple of girls in the beauty parlor, and definitely Dr. Hazlitt, Sheriff Metzger. How about Deputy Floyd, Deputy Andy? It'll be the whole Cabot Cove crew. Probably some new people we haven't met. I can tell you now that Evelyn Phillips, who was the editor of the Cabot Cove Gazette, comes back for a visit. I can also tell you that, of course, someone will be killed. And Jessica will be involved in trying to resolve what happened. I will also tell you that she may or may not do something that will get Sheriff Metzger quite annoyed with her.
Ooh.
Yeah, that rarely happens. Yeah. Usually they get along very well, but sometimes you never know. So that's all that I can tell you, but it will be a Cabot Cove book.
Excellent.
And that, as I say, I would expect scheduling wise, we wouldn't see it in print until probably this time next year.
All right. Well, you've given us something to look forward to, and at least people can rest easy. Yes, there will be Murder, She Wrote books. Yes, you will be writing them. Yes, Jessica will be back home in Cabot Cove for a bit. So that's sort of win-win-win. And the nice thing is, in the meantime, people can enjoy Death on the Emerald Isle and,
Yes.
50 some odd other books if they want to go revisit those. There's also 12 seasons of the television show. There's 4 movies. And I never remember them quite as well as I think that I do. So the nice thing about revisiting them is that they continue to surprise me. So you have all of these things
Absolutely.
to keep you company in the meantime. But right now, you got to get to the bookstore or go to your online retailer and buy Murder, She Wrote, Death on the Emerald Isle by Terrie Farley Moran. Another terrific addition to the series. So thank you so much for the book, Terrie, and for delving between the lines with us today. So appreciated.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Anytime, John, anytime at all. I'm very happy to visit you.
Yeah, I will hold you to that. And you know
Okay.
I will. All right, I'm going to stop recording. That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.